bounded Bible with me, but I'll use the text out of here. As Memorial Day weekend, I thought of various things, and as I was thinking about various things and those who have served our country, automatically you think of those who, on Memorial Weekend, at least I do, it's a natural thing for years, growing up, thinking about it, thinking service, thinking of a commitment to a service or whatever, to a military. Do you want to defend your country? Those kind of things, until you start to see your family members who have served in the military, and you see pictures and hear stories. And I had a great uncle, Don, who was in World War II, and he drove a big one of those big truck transporting goods or whatever. And I remember Dad talking about after he came back from the war, that on the 4th of July, whenever they were kids, he would light firecrackers, and he would take them and light it and throw it and sit there and watch it, and every time it went off, he jumped because the effects of what the war had on him. And then as time goes on, my dad got in there. He got into the military and Air Force, went to, I'm trying to think of that country where the one that thumbed his nose at Ronald Reagan, Gaddafi?
Gaddafi?
Yeah, in Libya. Yeah, Dad went to Libya, and he bought a watch there. I've got that watch. I don't have it on today, but it's at home. It's a really cool watch. He told me that he gave it to my older brother, and when he was young, and he worked at school one time, came back, the crystal was missing off of it, and so he gave it to me 10, 15 years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago now, I think. Anyway, I was able to find a crystal, put it on there, and it's one of my favorite watches to wear. And so then time came for me to, do you want to get in the service and things like that. And so then you think about, and I joined the military for the purpose of my education. I was wanting to be a mechanical engineer. And so the Air Force had some of the best schools you could go to. And so that's one of the reasons why I joined, but yet I had that patriotic heart and mind, wanting to serve, and enjoyed that. And I remember the day when we went to qualify. You had to go through to qualify with the M16. And I remember seeing the silhouette of a man down on the range, thinking, could I actually fire at another human being? Could I actually do that? Could I commit to doing that? I don't want to do that. I don't want to work on the airplanes or whatever. Y'all do that. That would be too traumatic or whatever. Well, being a soldier and branching over as we think about that in the life of a Christian, there are commitments that are made on all levels, and there's a lot of similarities there. There's scriptures, there's words that are used, particular words that indicate the mindset of a soldier as that of being a Christian. You see that discipline, and so with that in mind, I began to think about well, when these words were written in the scriptures, words such as soldier, fighting, discipline, those kind of things, those type of words which you would equate with a soldier. And I thought, well, in the context that it was used in scriptures, they were exposed to the military at that time, the Romans. And so you can read various things about the Roman, what it took to be a Roman soldier, and a lot of the recruits, ones that were brought in, they had like a height requirement. You had to be at least 5'10". And there's various other things that they would go through, and so as they would train them, and they did extensive training So when you had to fight, it was second nature. It just kicked in. And so as they would, and the first thing they learned as a Roman soldier was the march. And they marched and marched and marched and marched and marched and marched and marched. They had to have the marching down as a unit, stay as a unit, be as a unit. Everywhere you go, stay in formation. You've got to be as a unit. And not on top of that, they would put a pack on them that weighed about 90 pounds. And they would march and march and march and march before they could ever put their hand on a weapon. Then when it came time to move on in their training, provided they survived some of those other things that they was putting them through, they would give them wooden swords, wooden shields that weighed much heavier than the actual sword and shield that they would carry in battle. So if they could wield these things in training, then it would obviously be easy to handle the real thing that was much lighter. They would train them in the sword and the shield. They'd have a spear. They'd have other implements, and everything that they trained in was always heavier, much heavier than what they actually fought with. And so they were considered to be an elite fighting force, or very well trained in some of the accounts that I read. And so it took a mindset and a discipline to really do it. And once you were in, unless you washed out for some reason, the tenure for a Roman soldier was 25 years. That was the commitment. Whenever they were training, if you didn't show progress, if you didn't show the expected progress, your rations, or you were given subpar rations until you started to measure up. And then as you begin to measure up, okay, we're going to give you the good stuff. We want to make sure you are healthy and have what you need. It took a commitment and a discipline, and we know much about the Roman army. I wish we knew better as what we have seen depicted on TV sometimes, the heroism and things that they're not all grandiose. I think some of the stories that we would actually know about them at that time. But anyway, there's much to think about that. And then as life comes to where we are now, let's move forward to World War II, Vietnam War, Iraqi War. Operation Phantom Fury. There was a Sergeant David Balavia, Staff Sergeant, when he was there in 1998 in his house where he lived. They had a break-in in his house. He was young enough to know how to handle a weapon, but not old enough to, or not much older to where he had those life experiences. But anyway, two people had broke in the house, and his mom and dad were sleeping. I think his mom was in not the best health. And of course, in 1998, he was younger before he was part of Operation Phantom Fury in 2004. He knew where the shotgun was in the house. The two thieves came in. He goes and grabs the shotgun, and they come in and they face off, but he can't pull it up and aim and pull the trigger. The thieves don't fire upon him, don't do anything to that effect. They go ahead and rob and ransack the house while he's standing there with a shotgun in his hand and watches it. They leave. At the end of them getting their stuff together and going out, he was disappointed in himself, his own reflection of what I'm not able to defend my family. Mom and Dad's back there. Dad's a Vietnam War vet. His dad awakes toward the end of what's going on, and comes out with a .357, runs to the door, looks at his son, and was going to shoot, but they're too far gone. There's nothing to do. And that really impacted him moving forward. It came to the place to where he joined the military. I felt like I need to do this. Dad was in the military. I need to do this. It seemed like the right thing to do. And I'm going to join. And then the time came whenever he was in Iraq, in Fallujah. While he was there, they were obviously going from place to place, engaging firefights, and they came to one place where they came up what was considered to be a bunker, but they didn't realize until they were right in the middle of it that this is an actual bunker where their enemies were held up. There was different exchanges of fighting and everything that was taking place, and the thought had dawned on him, this is my moment. I have got to stand up and do what needs to be done. I didn't do it at home. I didn't do it then. I've been trained. I know what to do. I've got to go. Among his other people that were with him, let's just wait, let's fire into it. And he said, no, I've got to go in there and clear this place. We've got to go in. He goes in, and he fights for all he's worth, engaging one right after another. Close hand-to-hand stuff that takes place. Upstairs, things are coming up there. He fights and fights and fights until he has no more to give, but he knows that there's some more upstairs. He steps out on the balcony. By this point, due to the engagement that he had lost his helmet, he had dropped it. And he said, I had nothing else to give. He said, I decided to just take a smoke. For whatever reason, I felt like I needed to smoke. And as I'm smoking, one of the guys jumps down from the balcony above down to where he's at. And he said he had to drop on me. He said, but he was more interested in getting out of the way, getting out of there, and the guy's gone. And so then he finally, calling his other members to come in, it's okay to come on in, I need your help. He was worried about being shot because he didn't have his helmet on. And they finished clearing that bunker, so to speak, and they go on out. They call in artillery, and he just later on didn't revel in the fact that, I'm G.I. Joe or nothing like that, but the fact that something needed to be done. I had the discipline, I had the training, I am a soldier. I've got to make a commitment to either act or not act. His heroics, as we would call it, was considered that he saved 3 different squads that day of his own men by his own actions because of what he chose to do. In Philippians chapter 2, Philippians chapter 2 and verse 25. I've got the NIV here. I hope it will translate or read as. It says, but I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. Interesting how he, when Paul is writing here, he mentions and calls Epaphroditus, I guess that's the proper way to pronounce that, Epaphroditus. I probably just massacred that, I don't know. But to call him a fellow soldier, to me, to have that designation as a Christian, to say that is to speak to a discipline, it speaks to a commitment, it speaks to a level of buy into what's going on to where he calls him a fellow soldier. Philemon, chapter 2. Well, I said chapter 2, I'm sorry. Just go to Philemon. I'm sorry. Verse 2, I should have put in my notes. I just want to see how many of you was actually paying attention. It's like somebody one time told me, said, let's turn to Mark chapter 18. Well, there's not that many in Mark, so. And so anyway, to Philemon, our dear friend and fellow worker, also to Aphia, I think it is, our sister, and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church that meets in your home. What do you think of when you hear those kind of terms? I mean, obviously, we're not talking about a group of people, and we're certainly not a group committed to violence. We're not committed to picking up a firearm and you get saved or else. You know, that's not our approach. That's not what we do. But what does it make you think of when you hear the term in these two places, fellow soldier? If it makes you think of anything at all.
You were talking earlier about the extent of the commitment required by the Romans, you know, that they're committing for 25 years, Roman soldiers. So, I mean, one aspect of that, I think certainly is, you know, steadfast commitment to that which you're fighting for. Obviously, in this case, like you said, it's not an issue of physical, but spiritual warfare is a very real thing.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
It goes against the grain to fight a spiritual battle as opposed to a physical battle. In the movie The War Room, you saw how she fought from that little room and prayed and won those battles on her knees. And in Jesus' own life, he told his disciples, my struggle is different. And he actually gave himself to die to win the fight. So it goes against the grain of the human nature of us that says stand up and knock the other guy down. Sometimes you just have to stand there and be knocked down.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a determination to stand in the face of opposition and to make a stand for your beliefs, your whatever you think is what's right for the moment, to stand up for that situation. Yeah. It's a predetermined mindset, obviously. And if I'm going to call on someone to be a part of the mission and the action that we're trying to take place, I want somebody who has the same mindset that I do. I want that person with the commitment and their willingness to go to take it to the ends that I would want it to be taken to. If I couldn't do, or if I need to call on reserves or help, or if I set someone in my stead to do whatever. You want someone that is trained, someone that has been equipped with training, that knows what to do in those situations, and they've tested those things. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, in verse 4, the scriptures reads, "No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier." Now, as I was looking up these things with regards to soldiers, I looked up the different applications with regards to, and I picked out just a few. So there's a number of times that the word soldier is used, but there's different applications, I guess you could say. And so here we're looking at an enlisted. So when I look at this, let's read it again. No one entangled in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life. It's obvious to read just on the surface here that, okay, you get your mind wrapped around what you decided to do, what the walk you've chosen to take up as a Christian. And obviously he's speaking of being in ministry. I think it has been from a ministry perspective. And I think of every Christian that makes that commitment, and especially in that day and time, under the circumstances they had to make that choice, automatically engaged you with those who disagreed. You lived in a world of disagreement against the Christian walk. That he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier, who enlisted, who chose, who selected you. I think you'd make a good soldier. I think you'd make a good Christian. I think you would add to the ministry. God sees things in us that nobody else sees. It's kind of like when we size things up, we think, well, man, he'd make a good soldier. And we look on the outside sometimes at someone's physique and think that they can manage things. Oh, yeah, we definitely want this person, but only to find out sometimes it's not all that it seems. I remember I went from junior high to high school, and the high school was about a mile from where we lived. And of course, in August, at that time, early August, the football team would start to show up. And you'd hear them playing. The band would start doing their thing. I was part of the band, so we had to show up in the summer several weeks to get ready, the marching band. And so when school let in, and we go into our home room, I walked in there and this guy come in, and I'm telling you what, he filled the door. He was huge. And I thought, and now the football coach was my homeroom teacher. Big fella. We call him Fred Flintstone. He had he had one of those heads. We call him Fred Flintstone. That wasn't his name. He was a nice man, a wonderful man, and a great coach for the school there, for the football team. But that young guy come in, and I thought, man, I'm a sophomore. He's a sophomore? That's impossible. Where did he come from? Where did they grow this guy at? And, of course, when I went to high school, you had Mount Holly and Stanley came together. So you went this high. So anyway, those two schools came together, Mount Holly and Stanley, to make up East Gaston, where I attended school at. And the guy's name was Mac. You get a name with Mac, you think, oh, okay, let's call Mac. Yeah, Mac can do anything. We're sitting there, nobody's talking, we're all new, we don't know each other. And so I'm sitting back. I always made a point of being sure to sit back until I figured out the lay of the land. And so I'm sitting back there several seats behind him, and if Mac got between me and the sun, there would be an eclipse. He was that big. And the only reason I knew his name is because different people would say, hey, Mac, and he wouldn't say nothing, like that. And the coach comes in. He comes in, he walks across, and he's looking around, and he said, Mac, why weren't you at football practice, the other day? Why don't you come on the field? And he goes, well, Coach, I just couldn't make it. I had some things going on. And when he started talking, I said, enough said. I said, that didn't mean that Mac couldn't hold his own. Didn't mean that at all. But Mac had this physique, but when I got to know him, he was about as timid as a guy as you could ever find. Had no interest in football. None whatsoever. And so I'd already sized him up in my head. Now, I wasn't dumb enough to think, well, if ever something happened between me and Mac, I could take him. No, I ain't that stupid. But you size people up, you take a look sometimes, and the Lord chooses us, I believe, because every last person who accepts this call that he enlists into his work, he equips with what we need to be able to do the job he's assigned us to do. And he's looking for committed individuals that will do the job, regardless of what we may look like or what certain expectations others may have of us. The other word that stands out when you look at soldier and you're searching these things, there in 2 Timothy, look at chapter 4 in verse 7. Here we read where Paul is writing, he says, "For I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." He talks about, I've done my part. I have fought. When it came time to fight, I've done what I needed to do. I didn't shy away from it. I took the commands that my commanding officer or my Lord gave me, and I carried out those assignments. Regardless of how hard or how light it may have been, I've done those things. I've taken the task. I'm ready to go. I often thought while we were in basic training and stuff, I often thought, yeah, I don't know about this. I'm going to have to think this thing through. Because I can just, the wars that you see, and you see John Wayne, follow me, guys. But everything I noticed when in basic training is, y'all go up there. You go do this. You go do that. And I'm thinking, I want somebody to lead on this thing. You want to tell me, show me what you mean. Just go on out there and show me what you're talking about. Of course, thankfully I was in the Air Force, so I didn't have to worry about what the ground pounders do, the Army, and what they do in the fight. But I always often thought, yeah, I'd like for you to show me first what it is you're talking about. 1 Corinthians, let's look at chapter 9 in 1 Corinthians. 9 and verse 26. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air. As I've read this, I remembered years ago reading about this, how it's talking about the training of those who would fight, those who would box. And they would shadow box. You kind of get against the wall where you can see your shadow there, and they would train in techniques and that was some of the training. It's not all the training. But you fight as though not one just beating the air, you're actually engaging in the fight. You're actually coming to blows with what's in front of you or making those kind of exchanges. I told the class before, whenever started in heat and air conditioning, and the first job I had and I was trained in the military. What I done was I was a metals processing specialist. Anything to do with metal, they taught me how to do it. And the first job I got in civilian, outside of that, when I went to this new town and working in a church, I've got a job to support myself. The first day on the job, they put me in, these guys were up on ladders putting this, trying to connect some ductwork in this old hollowed out building that they was renovating, downtown Henderson, North Carolina. And they're up there swearing and cussing, throwing hammers and whatever, and there was 3 of them way up there on these 12-foot ladders and trying to get this ductwork, and couldn't get it connected. So I'm just standing down there, okay, I'm watching what they're doing, looking at the tools they're using, okay. Finally, one of the guys, he looks down there and he said, "Well, what are you looking at?" Boss told me to show up here. I'm new on the job. This is a great introduction for the first time. And he comes down with the hammer in his hand, and he said, "Do you think you can do any better?" And it hit me, just that quick. When I took the hammer and I held it in between us, I said, "I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me." Now, in the middle of all this cussing and fussing and spitting and whatever, the room got quiet. I went up the steps, got up there, and I said, "What is he trying to do?" And they said, "This drive cleat has got to go on here." And so if you don't understand the terminology, what that is, it was a metal binder that connects the two pieces of metal, and you had to get it on there a particular way. There's a certain way it goes on. I put that thing on, worked on with it, hit it with a hammer, and drove it all the way up and secured it at the top, and it went in. And then when it went in, the two guys on the ladder, they're just like, "Well, I'm glad you were here." I come down the ladder, and the guy that was doing the most cussing, when he was trying to do it, when I got to the ground, I handed him the hammer, and I said, "I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me." Okay, what we're going to do next, fellas? I'm thankful that my training as a Christian, going to college, Bible school, things of that nature, being raised in Sunday after Sunday, Sunday school class, sitting in church, listening, reading your Bible, that at the moment that when it's called upon you to defend and to set a standard in a room that needed a standard to be set, that I had the gumption and had the anointing and the mindset to speak up. Not proudly, of course, not at all. But to put a stand, that this is where I'm going to stand. This is what I represent. It was interesting how I got put with the most cussing guy to train apprenticeship on servicing on units and stuff. And he loved to cuss. He cussed and used the Lord's name in vain, and I detested working with him. I prayed and prayed and prayed about, "Lord, give me a word to say to this guy." For 2 weeks we've been going places in this van, and I've had enough of him cussing. I just can't stand it. It's vexing me, Lord. And so we got up that morning. We was going from Henderson, we was going to Oxford, North Carolina, to work on some industrial things or whatever. And the Lord gave me a word. He gave me a word. And, or at least I felt like it was from the Lord. And we loaded the van up with the stuff we was going to put on there. We have all the implements we need. And so I got my coffee. We had little styrofoam cups that, sometimes I think they cheat you sometimes in these establishments. Yeah, come and get some of this coffee. Watered down stuff. You can't throw enough creamer in there or whatever. But anyway, it was hot. It resembled coffee. Let's drink it. And so had that, go in, set it in. If you remember those vans where the engine was in the back of the engine's in the van with you. It's got that little cover over there. And I set my cup down there. Before I could get seated good, he had let out a flurry of things or whatever. Now this is early in the morning. You can't to be awake that early in the morning. You're cussing, and it hit me, that word that I felt like the Lord gave me. I said, "William," he said, "What?" I said, "You know what I think about people who cuss and use the Lord's name in vain the way you do?" He said, "No, what?" I said, "That they don't have enough intelligence, enough vocabulary to speak intelligently, to use other words, so you just default to those same old things." William didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. We had worked enough together to where when we got out of the truck, I knew what he needed, and so I grabbed it. And I would say stuff to him. I said, "You want the ladder? You want the hammer?" But he wouldn't speak to me for 2 solid weeks. I loved it. No cussing, no hearing the Lord's name in vain. Thank you, Jesus. And And then after 2 weeks, I got branched out into some other thing, got my own truck, and was able to go out on some of my own jobs and do things like that. The Lord gives us words. He gives us things at times to say, and it's a matter of determining, well, am I going to fight? Am I going to stand up? Or am I going to be run over? Let's see here. We've done that one. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 12. Just a couple more scriptures. Now godliness with contentment is great gain. And I have noticed real quickly that Welton is reading the wrong verse. Fight the good fight of faith. Lay hold on eternal life, to which you were also called, and have confessed the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. We have to choose to fight, and there's no doubt to me in this room here that every one of you are willing and have had your own battles, engaged the enemy on your own terms from time to time. It's interesting, as I was looking up this word fight, the soldier, things of that in the New Testament, in the Greek, in their applications, I thought, well, I'm going to take a look at it and see what the Hebrew and the way it's used, see what is standing out here. What stand out to me in Exodus chapter 14, in verse 14, it reads, "The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." Now, obviously, when we read Exodus, we read, and we're reading about what is taking place for the people of Israel in their deliverance. And they're receiving instruction, and they're receiving guidance from Moses regarding how we're going to do the Exodus, how we're going to face Pharaoh, how all this is going to take place. When you read it here in this text, in the Hebrew, the Lord will fight for you and you shall hold your peace. It means to actually engage, that he's going to actually make sure that it's more than just the inference that I got from the Hebrew. It's more than just we're going to have a word battle. We're going to throw some vocabulary back and forth and that's it. No. This term, the way it's used here, actually means to actually, we're coming to blows. I'm going to actually engage on your behalf. Is what he's telling the Israelites, and that's what he did. That's what he did. Any thoughts? Any comments that you'd like to add that may have been generated through my rambling? Go ahead, Al.
One of our ministers, Clifford Bridges, some of you may have known him. His brother Cecil worked here at Publishing House for years. His younger brother, Jackie, was youth director in Tennessee. He's the only one of them still living. But Clifford shared a story about this warfare between the saved and the unsaved. He was pastoring a church in Texas, and a man who owned quite a sizable ranch was an atheist. But his wife was a devout Christian member of the Church of God. So Brother Bridges sought the Lord for this guy, tried to witness to him several times. It's, no, I believe there's no God. I know there's no God. And so one day as he was praying for the man, God said, I will give you the power while you're talking to that man to turn the electricity off to his ranch. You speak it and I'll turn it off. To show him that there is a God and that God responds to prayer. And it'll stay off until you call it back. And so he went out to visit with him, and they sat in his office and talked. And he said, the Lord has given me permission to do this. He said, he wants you to know that he is, and that you believed a serious error. And so he said, I'm going to ask him to turn the power off now. And he called for the power to go off, and it went off. And they sat there in the dark and talked for half an hour. And the fellow says, when are you going to call it back? And he said, I'll call it back now. Lord, we're asking you to turn the power back on. The power went back on. The man still would not commit himself to Christ. And he cautioned him. He said, you will face this in the judgment.
Yeah. And we have those moments of confrontation that are difficult but are necessary. And we do what God gives us to do. I was working in the cotton mill. This is after I've been in the military. I was in the Air Guard. And I was working at the cotton mill where I had mowed grass many times as in high school. And I got a job there in doing the welding. And there was a guy there, I'll give his first name, Robert. He had been there for some time, and we were down in the bottom of the mill there, and day after day after day after day, as I'm coming in, I'm going to Bible school while I'm there, going to East Coast Bible College, and welding and doing whatever maintenance needed to be done there in the mill, cotton mill. And Robert, he was a typical lint head, where you come in and do, they all smoked. It just seemed like I couldn't understand it. You're breathing this stuff, but yet you're going to, let's make it better. Let's smoke on top of that. And so he was constantly was antagonizing me. And it was this way of just having fun, poking fun. That's the only way I could see it. Anyway, he kept poking me about being a Christian, things of this nature and stuff like that. And he would come up to me all the time. And of course, he wore those T-shirts with that one pocket, and that's your pocket. Your cigarettes are right there. And he got to ask me one day, he said, and I talked, and so when he'd pick at me, I'd pick at him. That's a sin. You shouldn't be doing that's a sin, blah, blah, blah. And they had to step outside the shop to smoke, but they'd step right outside the door. Made a big difference. And I told him one day, I was coming through there, and I had enough of him. If somehow I reached my limit, and he said, what exactly is wrong with this? And he had a plastic cup in his hand. He had just got a drink, and he had that cigarette in his hand. And I said, Robert, it's called sin. And I grabbed that pack of cigarettes and started crushing them. And I said, 3 letters, 1 word, sin. You think you got it? He goes, I got it. and so that afternoon, when I had come out, they was on break. They was having a smoke break, and I was walking by them, and somebody said, what happened to your cigarettes? He said, him. He said, sin. 3 letters, 1 word, and that cigarette was all like that. He said he was going to smoke it anyway. He said, man, these things are expensive. I'm going to smoke it anyway. And I had that love-hate relationship with, I don't want to call it love or not, but anyway, with Robert. And one day I was on my break. I enjoyed trying to learn different things that I could learn in the shop, and they had a lathe in there. And I was working on that lathe, toying with the lathe. And Robert seemed to have a very serious mindset that day. And he came in, and he was on the other side of the lathe. And we were talking, and I was turning something down, and it got to the point where he's really serious. So I stopped. And he was asking me questions about salvation, things of that nature. And I said, Robert, do you remember all the things I've talked to you about the Lord? And I've been trying to witness to you about Jesus Christ, about being a Christian. He said, yes, I remember all that. And I said, you haven't accepted the Lord yet. You are a sinner. Oh, he got mad. He drew back his hand and come up there to that lathe. And I said, now, Robert, I'm going to stand here and I'm not going to move. I'm going to let you swing. I said, but answer me this. Am I right or am I wrong? If I'm right, why are you going to hit me? He said, you're right. He said, but I don't like how it sounds. I said, then you can change it. You can accept this, what I've been telling you, and become a Christian. I said, there's going to be a judgment one of these days. And if you don't ever accept Christ, we're going to stand before the Lord, and I'm going to stand on one side, and you're going to be on the other. And this very event is going to play before us. And God is going to cast you in outer darkness for not accepting. He's going to reward me for doing what I'm supposed to do. Tears started coming down his eyes. He took off running through the shop. Dummy me, I took off right behind him. I said, you can run from me, but you can't run from God. I was running through the mill. I said, Robert, that's the Holy Ghost. He's trying to get a hold of you. He runs through the next shop, goes out the door, runs across the field to his truck, and I'm behind him the whole time. That's the Lord, Robert. You need to commit. You need to convert. He gets in his truck, rolls the window up, starts the truck up, and takes off. He didn't clock out. He didn't clock out. And it was funny when you look back at it, but at the moment when I saw those tears, I thought, I got him. I got him. And so I didn't know it was going to affect me that way just thinking about it, but I left there not long after that, several months of stuff, left the school, left there, and when Dad retired from Sears, Dad went to work at the mill, and Dad had to continue to do some work. And I remember Dad telling me, he said, you remember you talking about Robert? And I said, yeah. He said, he got saved.
Praise the Lord.
And so we have those moments that we get challenged. We get those moments when it comes time to say something. And I'm thankful that the Lord used me at that time to speak in his life.
You were talking, you read a while ago about how you train, Paul was talking about how you train to do what you're not naturally inclined to do. You train your body to do this like an athlete. I heard a story about a guy that was rescued after World War II. He was a young kid, he was about 11 or 12, and he was in a concentration camp in Germany. And he watched how the American soldiers came in and took over. And he got it in his mind that if he could ever get to the country that could make soldiers like that, he called them G.I. Joes. He said, if I can ever get there, I'm going to become a G.I. Joe. He was either Hungarian or Romanian, but he was a Jew, and his last name was a Jewish name like Levi or something to that effect. It wasn't Levi, but it was a Jewish name, very obvious Jewish name. When he was 16, he came to America, and he tried to learn the language. He had a really thick Hungarian accent, and he just couldn't get English very well at all. When he became 18, he went down to join the military, and they wouldn't take him because of his language. His English was horrible. It just couldn't be understood. I heard him tell this story, and his language was still horrible even at about 70 years old.
Mm.
They wouldn't take him in the military, so he hired a speech coach. And they finally took him, the Korean War broke out, so they lowered the bar a little bit when the war broke out. He ended up in Korea, and his outfit was running away from the Chinese, who had them outnumbered about 10 to 1. And they went to a place, they had a lot of wounded, and they were trying to get through this pass and get to the other side where they could be evacuated. And his colonel called for him, He said, go get me that funny talking Jew. And they called for him, and he stood before his colonel, and he said, if we can get, they had about 400 guys, he said, if we get these 400 guys through that pass right there by dark, I want you to defend that pass against these 10,000 Chinese behind us and stop them from coming through that pass. That pass is your responsibility. Can you do that? And it was an impossible task for what he did. But he had this training, and he had this high opinion of his leader, his commander, that he said, I stayed up all night digging foxholes, and he said, everybody that didn't want their weapon, I would put it there with some ammunition. He said, I'd shoot from this foxhole a while, and then I'd run over here and throw some grenades from this foxhole, and that. Back and forth he went all night long, and he didn't let a single Chinese come through there. And when daylight came, there were hundreds of dead Chinese out in front of him, and they had turned back. They didn't know he was a one-man army. And he caught up with his guys. The Chinese went that way, and he caught up to his guys. And when he showed up, he said his commanding officer looked at him looked at him like he was a ghost. He said, I didn't think you'd been through that. He said, I'm going to recommend you for the Medal of Honor. And he said, I didn't know what that meant, but all I knew was my commander asked me to do it.
Yeah.
And he got the Medal of Honor.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I remember reading that story. I remember that. Once you got to the foxhole part, I remembered it. Well, we got just a few moments left. Do you have any prayer requests? I know Sharon had got a praise report.
Jessica got a job.
With the
She
state?
has to go to Nashville.